My name is Cassandra, and I'm 28 years old. When I was 14, my father remarried after my mother died. What began as helping with my new half-siblings quickly turned into being their full-time parent. For years, I cooked, cleaned, and raised children that weren't mine. Yesterday, I finally stood my ground and told my dad I'm not his backup mum. Now my phone won't stop ringing. Where are you watching from today? If you're new here, please hit that like and subscribe button. Let me take you back to where this all began. I had what most would call a perfect childhood until I was 10 years old. My parents were high school sweethearts who married right after college. My dad worked as an accountant, while my mum taught 4th grade at the local elementary school. We lived in a small but comfortable house in a suburb of Portland, with a backyard where we would have barbecues every Sunday during summer. Those are the memories I cherish most. My dad flipping burgers, while my mum and I set the picnic table with red checkered cloth and plastic plates. Everything changed when my mum started getting headaches. At first we thought nothing of it. She would pop some painkillers and continue grading papers or helping me with homework. But then the headaches got worse, and she started forgetting things. One day she went to pick me up from school and couldn't remember which car was hers. That was when Dad insisted she see a doctor. The diagnosis came 3 days before my 11th birthday, stage 4 brain cancer. The doctors gave her a year, maybe 2, with aggressive treatment. She fought harder than anyone I've ever known. I would sit beside her hospital bed doing homework while she went through chemo, both of us pretending everything was normal, even as her beautiful brown hair fell out in clumps. Mum made it to my 12th birthday. She died 2 weeks later in her sleep holding Dad's hand while I slept in a chair beside her bed. The funeral is mostly a blur in my memory. I remember wearing a black dress that Mum had bought me for a school recital and thinking how much she would have hated seeing me wear it to her funeral. For 18 months after Mum died, it was just Dad and me. We were a team figuring out how to exist in a world without her. Dad learned to braid my hair for school, though he never quite got it right. I learned to cook simple meals so we wouldn't have to eat takeout every night. We had a routine. I'd set the table while Dad microwaved whatever casserole the neighbours had brought over that week. We'd eat in silence most nights, occasionally sharing something about our day. Then we'd wash dishes together before watching an hour of TV and heading to bed. Dad started staying late at work more often around the time I turned 14. I didn't think much of it until he came home one night with a strange expression on his face. He sat me down at our kitchen table and told me he had met someone online named Stephanie. She made him laugh for the first time since Mum died, he said. I remember forcing a smile even as my stomach twisted into knots. Stephanie was nothing like my mother. Where Mum had been practical and nurturing, Stephanie was glamorous and carefree. She was only 32, 11 years younger than my father. The first time I met her, she was wearing stiletto heels and a dress that seemed more appropriate for a nightclub than a family dinner. She barely acknowledged me, focusing all her attention on my father. Their courtship was a whirlwind. Within 3 months of their first date, Dad announced they were getting married. I tried to be happy for him, I really did. But something about Stephanie felt off. She never asked me questions about myself or made any effort to bond with me. When I would enter a room, conversations between her and my father would abruptly stop. The wedding was small, just a courthouse ceremony, followed by lunch at an expensive restaurant. I sat alone at the table while Dad and Stephanie took photos and accepted congratulations from the handful of guests. My Aunt Lisa, Mum's sister, sat beside me and squeezed my hand. "You can always come stay with me if things get tough," she whispered. I nodded but didn't really understand what she meant at the time. 3 months after the wedding, Stephanie announced she was pregnant. Dad was ecstatic, talking about how excited he was to start fresh with a new family. Each time he said those words, I felt myself disappear a little more. Was I not part of this family anymore? Was I just a remnant of his old life that he was trying to move past? I tried connecting with Stephanie during her pregnancy. I offered to help decorate the nursery and even bought a parenting book so I could learn about babies. Stephanie rebuffed every attempt. "I've got this handled," she would say with a dismissive wave. "Don't you have homework or something?" When I was 15, Stephanie gave birth to twins, a boy named Aiden and a girl named Aria. Dad spent the first week after their birth walking around in a daze of happiness. He would carry both babies around the house, showing them pictures of their new home. "This is where you'll grow up," he would tell them. "This is your family." Stephanie's attitude changed almost immediately after returning from the hospital. She complained constantly about how the babies ruined her sleep, her body, her social life. She would hand them to me whenever they cried, claiming she needed a break. Dad started working longer hours to support our now larger family, leaving me alone with Stephanie and the twins more and more. Gradually, without anyone explicitly saying it, I became responsible for more of the childcare. At first, it was just watching them while Stephanie took a nap or went shopping. Then it was feeding them bottles and changing diapers. By the time the twins were 6 months old, I was doing most of their care while also trying to keep up with my schoolwork. One night, I found myself alone with both crying babies, trying to soothe them, while also finishing a history paper that was due the next day. I looked around at our messy living room. Toys scattered everywhere, dirty bottles piled in the sink, laundry overflowing from the hamper, and realized with startling clarity that I had somehow become the family caretaker at 15 years old. By the time I turned 16, I had developed a routine that would make most adults cringe. I woke up at 5 every morning to get myself ready for school, then got the twins up, changed, and fed by 6:30. Dad would usually stumble out of his room around then, grab coffee, and leave for work with barely a goodbye. Stephanie would sleep until at least 10, claiming she needed her beauty rest. After school, I would rush home to relieve our elderly neighbour, Mrs. Patterson, who watched the twins for the minimum wage my father paid her. The moment I walked through the door, Mrs. Patterson would gather her things and leave with a sympathetic pat on my shoulder. "You're a good girl, Cassandra," she would say every day. "Too good if you ask me." The twins were walking by then, getting into everything. Aiden was particularly active, climbing furniture and pulling books off shelves faster than I could replace them. Aria was quieter but more demanding, wanting to be held constantly. Between keeping them safe fed and entertained, I barely had time to start my homework before Dad got home around 7. Dinner was my responsibility too. I learnt to cook one-handed with Aria on my hip, while Aiden clutched at my legs. Simple meals at first. Pasta with jarred sauce, frozen vegetables heated up in the microwave. But I got better with practice. Dad would eat quickly, compliment the food, then retreat to his home office to finish up some work. Stephanie, when she was home, would pick at her food and complain it was too bland or too spicy or too whatever, gave her an excuse not to help with cleanup. My grades started slipping. I had always been an A student, but that semester I brought home C's and D's. My English teacher, Mrs. Hendricks, kept me after class one day to ask if everything was okay at home. I nearly broke down crying, but forced myself to smile and say everything was fine, just adjusting to the new babies. She looked skeptical but didn't push. Friends stopped calling after I cancelled plans for the 5th or 6th time. I couldn't go to movies or football games or study groups because someone had to watch the twins. The few friends who did come over quickly grew tired of hanging out while I changed diapers and cleaned up spills. By the end of sophomore year, I ate lunch alone most days. Junior year brought college application season. My counselor called me in to discuss potential schools, and I had to admit I hadn't even thought about it. The look of concern on her face made me uncomfortable. "Cassandra, with your freshman and sophomore records, you could have aimed for some excellent schools," she said, reviewing my file. What happened? That night I tried talking to Dad about college. I found him in the kitchen making a rare appearance to get a beer from the fridge. "Dad, I need to think about college applications," I said. "But with the twins and everything." He looked surprised, as if he'd forgotten I would eventually graduate high school. "College? Well, that's still a ways off, isn't it? We can figure something out when the time comes." "It is the time, Dad. Applications are due in a few months." He sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Look, Cassie, you know money's tight right now, and who would help with the twins? Stephanie's not really the maternal type." "That's not my problem," I said louder than intended. "Mum would have wanted me to go to college." Dad's face hardened. "Don't bring your mother into this. This is temporary, okay? Help out for now, and I promise I'll pay for community college later. You can transfer to a 4-year school after that." I knew it was a promise he wouldn't keep, but I nodded anyway. What choice did I have? Around this time, Aunt Lisa started calling more frequently. She lived in Boston, too far to visit often, but she would check in every few weeks. During one call, while I was trying to stop Aiden from eating crayons, she asked pointed questions about my daily schedule. "Cassandra, how many hours a day are you taking care of those children?" she asked, voice tight. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Most hours I'm not at school, I guess." "And what is your stepmother doing during this time?" I lowered my voice. "She has book club on Mondays, yoga on Tuesdays, and Thursdays shopping with friends on Wednesdays, and she needs Fridays to recover from her busy week." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Finally, Aunt Lisa spoke. "Honey, you're being taken advantage of. This isn't right." "It's fine," I insisted, even as I pulled a soggy crayon from Aiden's mouth. "Dad needs the help. It's just until the twins are a little older." "And when will that be, when they're in college?" I laughed it off, but her words stayed with me. Were the twins my responsibility? I hadn't chosen to have them. I hadn't even been consulted about Stephanie joining our family. Yet somehow their care had fallen entirely on my teenage shoulders. By the time the twins turned 3, they were fully talking, potty-trained mostly, and even more demanding. Cassie plaking, Cassie hungry, Cassie Aiden hit me. My name was usually the first word out of their mouths when they wanted something not mommy or daddy. I was the one they came to with scraped knees and bad dreams. For my 18th birthday, I had hoped for something special. Maybe Dad would take the day off or we could go out to dinner at a nice restaurant. Instead, he handed me a wrapped box over breakfast, while the twins threw Cheerios at each other. Inside was a new baby monitor. "The old one's been acting up," he explained. "This one has better range so you can hear the kids from your room more clearly." I stared at the box, fighting back tears. It wasn't a gift for me. It was a gift for them, a tool to make me a more efficient caretaker. I thanked him anyway and went to my room clutching the monitor like it was a death sentence. I was 22 and the twins had just started 2nd grade. I'd been out of high school for 4 years, working part-time at a local retail store while still being the primary caregiver for Aiden and Aria. The routine had become so normalized that I hardly questioned it anymore. Wake up, get kids ready, drop them at school, work my shift, pick them up, help with homework, make dinner, do bedtime collapse, into bed, repeat. The only change to our family dynamic was Stephanie's announcement that she was pregnant again. She had been threatening to leave for months, complaining that Dad worked too much and she was bored in our suburban neighborhood. The pregnancy seemed to be their attempt at saving the marriage. When Dad told me about the baby, it wasn't with the excitement of a parent, but with the desperation of a drowning man. "Cassie, I need you now more than ever," he said, cornering me in the kitchen after the twins were asleep. "Stephanie's having a rough pregnancy. The doctor says she needs to rest." "Dad, I'm already doing everything," I replied, gesturing to the dishes. I was washing the lunch boxes I was preparing for tomorrow, the laundry waiting to be folded. I know, he said, rubbing his temples. "But it's just for a little while, until the baby comes and things settle down. Stephanie's threatening to go stay with her mother if she doesn't get more help. You know what she's like when she's unhappy." I did know. Stephanie's unhappiness affected everyone in the house. She would slam doors, make cutting remarks, and give the twins the cold shoulder, leaving them confused and clingy. It was always easier to just do what she wanted than deal with the fallout. "Fine," I said, as I always did. "I'll figure it out." That semester, I had finally enrolled in a single class at the community college, Introduction to Business. It met twice a week in the evenings, and I had arranged for Dad to be home those nights to watch the twins. I was so proud of myself for finally taking a step toward education, something that had been put on hold for years. The first missed class happened 3 weeks in. Dad called me at work, apologetic but firm. "Stephanie's having cramps. I need to take her to the doctor. You'll have to skip class tonight and pick up the kids. Dad, we have a test today. I'm sure your professor will understand. Family comes first, Cassie. Family first." It had become his mantra whenever he needed me to sacrifice something. The problem was my sacrifices never seemed to end. After missing 3 classes due to similar emergencies, my professor, Dr. Johnson, asked me to stay after class. He was an older man with kind eyes behind thick glasses. "Miss Walker, you're bright. Your assignments show real promise," he said. "But these absences are affecting your grade. Is everything all right?" Something about his genuine concern broke through my carefully constructed facade. To my horror, I started crying right there in the classroom. Between sobs, I told him about the twins, about Stephanie's pregnancy, about years of being the family caretaker. Dr. Johnson listened without interrupting, handing me tissues from his desk drawer. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair with a troubled expression. "Cassandra, what you're describing is called parentification. It's a form of family dysfunction where a child takes on the role of parent. It's not healthy and it's not fair to you." "But who will take care of them if I don't?" I asked, voicing the fear that kept me trapped. "That's not your responsibility," he said firmly. "Your father and stepmother chose to have children. You didn't." His words were like a key unlocking something inside me, but I wasn't ready to open that door yet. Instead, I thanked him for his concern and promised to try harder with attendance. We both knew it was an empty promise. Stephanie gave birth to another girl, Mia, 2 months later. Unlike with the twins, where she had at least made a show of maternal interest for a few weeks, she seemed completely detached from this baby. She would hold Mia when the visitors came by, cooing appropriately for the cameras, then hand her to me the moment they left. To complicate matters, Stephanie developed postpartum depression. She would lock herself in her bedroom for days, emerging only to criticize the way I was handling things, or to pick fights with Dad. The doctor prescribed medication, but Stephanie took it irregularly, claiming it made her feel foggy. Dad received a promotion around this time, one that required frequent travel. "It's a great opportunity," he told me, as if I should be happy about it. "The money will help with college for all three kids." All three kids. As if Mia was my sister rather than my half-sister. As if I hadn't already postponed college indefinitely to raise his children. With Dad travelling and Stephanie barely functioning, I was left alone with a newborn and 2 7-year-olds. I had to cut my work hours, which meant less money for the community college classes I had been trying to take. One by one, I dropped the courses I had registered for, watching my dream of education fade away again. During one particularly difficult week, when Mia was colicky and the twins were fighting constantly, Aunt Lisa called. Hearing the exhaustion in my voice, she made an offer that tempted me more than I wanted to admit. "Come live with me in Boston," she said. "I have a spare bedroom. You could enroll in classes here, get a fresh start." "I can't just leave," I replied, bouncing Mia while trying to referee the twins' argument over a toy. "Why not? They're not your children, Cassandra." "But they depend on me," I said, watching as Aria looked to me to solve her problem with Aiden. "They don't really have anyone else." "That's not your fault or your responsibility," Aunt Lisa insisted. "Your mother would be heartbroken to see you giving up your life like this." The mention of my mother always hit hard. Would she want me to stay, or would she want me to pursue my own dreams? I looked at the twins' faces at baby Mia in my arms and couldn't imagine walking away from them. They hadn't asked for any of this either. "I'll think about it," I told Aunt Lisa, but we both knew I would stay, at least for now. I turned 25 with little fanfare. The twins were now 10 and Mia was 3. They made me handmade cards that I treasured, but otherwise the day passed like any other. Making meals, settling arguments, helping with homework, doing laundry. The biggest change in our household was Stephanie's increasing absences. What had started as girls' nights once a week had evolved into weekends away, visiting friends. Dad and I both knew she was seeing other men, but neither of us confronted her. It was easier to pretend we didn't know than deal with the fallout of acknowledging her infidelity. The children adjusted to her sporadic presence, as children do, treating her more like an exciting visitor than a parent when she was home. "Mum brought presents," they would shout when her car pulled into the driveway after days away. They had learnt not to expect her at school functions or bedtimes, turning to me or Dad instead. The inevitable finally happened 6 months after my 25th birthday. I came home from work to find Dad sitting alone in the kitchen, a glass of whiskey in his hand, something he rarely drank. The kids were nowhere to be seen. "Mrs. Patterson took them for ice cream," he said before I could ask. "Stephanie's gone." "When will she be back?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "She's not coming back," he replied, staring into his glass. "She left a note saying she wasn't cut out for family life and needed to find herself. She's moving to California with some guy she met at yoga." Despite everything, I felt a pang of sadness. Not for Dad or myself, but for the children who had just lost their mother, however neglectful she had been. Did she say anything about the kids? Dad's laugh was hollow. "She said they'd be better off without her. That they have you anyway." That night, after helping Dad break the news to the children, I lay awake thinking about Stephanie's words. "They have you anyway." She had always seen me as the mother replacement, the built-in nanny that allowed her to opt out of parenting. And now she had opted out permanently. The weeks following Stephanie's departure were chaotic. Dad alternated between anger and depression, sometimes snapping at everyone, other times barely getting out of bed. The twins understood enough to be hurt and confused, while Mia kept asking when Mommy was coming home. I tried to keep things as normal as possible, but I was exhausted from carrying everyone's emotional burden along with all the practical responsibilities. Dad eventually pulled himself together enough to function, but he responded by working even more. "Someone has to pay the bills," he would say when I asked him to be home more for the children, especially now that we're down to one income. We had always been down to one income. Stephanie hadn't worked in years. But I didn't point this out, just as I didn't point out that I was essentially working 2 full-time jobs, my retail position and running our household, for free. The only bright spot during this time was my friendship with Jamie, a co-worker at the clothing store where I worked. She was a few years older than me and taking classes at the state university while working. We had similar shifts, and she would often listen to my family stories with increasing disbelief. "Wait, you're 25 and you've been raising your dad's kids since you were a teenager," she asked one day during our lunch break, "and you're not getting paid." "That's messed up, Cassandra." "They're my siblings," I said defensively, though the words sounded hollow even to me. So that doesn't make you their mother, Jamie said, pointing her fork at me for emphasis. Your dad should hire a nanny or something. You deserve your own life. It wasn't the first time someone had said this to me, but coming from a peer rather than Aunt Lisa made it hit differently. Jamie had no family obligation to me, no agenda other than friendship, and she thought my situation was wrong. For my 26th birthday, Dad gave me a set of expensive cleaning supplies. I know you mentioned wanting to deep clean the bathrooms, he said, seeming genuinely proud of the gift. These are supposed to be the best. I thanked him automatically, while something inside me shriveled. He didn't see me as his daughter anymore. I was the housekeeper, the nanny, the replacement wife. Any identity I might have had separate from family caretaker had disappeared years ago. That same week, Aunt Lisa came for a rare visit. She hadn't been to our house in years, and her shock at seeing my day-to-day reality was evident. She watched as I cooked dinner, helped the twins with homework, bathed Mia, settled an argument, and cleaned the kitchen, all while Dad sat in the living room watching TV. "This isn't right," she said later, after the children were in bed. "Cassandra, you've given up your entire youth for his choices." "What am I supposed to do?" I asked, genuinely wanting an answer. "The kids need me. The kids need their father to step up," she countered. "And you need to think about your future. You're 26 with no degree, no career path, and no life experience outside this house. What happens when the kids grow up? When they go to college, what will you have then?" Her questions hit me like physical blows because I had no answers. I had been so focused on day-to-day survival that I hadn't allowed myself to think long-term. The idea of the children growing up and leaving was both liberating and terrifying. Who would I be without them to care for? A few months later, Dad started dating again. Her name was Sandra, a woman from his office who seemed nice enough during the few times she came to dinner. But I noticed how her smile would tighten when the kids got loud or made messes. How she would check her watch when Mia had a tantrum. She wasn't interested in becoming an instant mother to 3 children. Dad must have noticed too, because he started making comments about how I was so good with the kids and how Sandra admired my natural caregiving abilities. One night, after I put the children to bed, he approached me with what seemed like casual conversation, but felt like something else. "Sandra and I are thinking about taking a weekend trip next month," he said. "Just the 2 of us. You'd be okay with the kids, right? You're so much better with them anyway." The subtext was clear. If Dad was going to have a relationship with Sandra, I would need to remain the primary caregiver indefinitely. His chance at happiness depended on my continued sacrifice. Something snapped inside me. A vision of my future stretched before me, years, decades of the same routine growing older in this house, watching the children grow up and leave, while I remained taking care of Dad in his old age, never having lived my own life. That night, I emailed Aunt Lisa about her previous offer. Was the spare room still available? Did she know of any job openings in Boston? The next morning, I submitted an online application for a customer service position at a tech company near her apartment. Within 2 weeks, I had a job offer. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid more than my retail job and had benefits. More importantly, it was mine. A chance at independence, at building a life that wasn't defined by other people's needs. The job offer email sat in my inbox for 3 days while I worked up the courage to accept it. Each time I looked at the children's faces, doubt would creep in. Was I abandoning them? Would they understand? Would they hate me for leaving? But then I would catch a glimpse of myself in the mirror. The permanent furrow between my brows, the tired eyes, the tense shoulders, and remember that I was a person too. I deserved a chance at my own life. With Jamie and Aunt Lisa's encouragement, I formulated a plan. I would tell Dad 2 weeks before my planned departure, giving him time to arrange childcare. I would set up video calls with the children visit during holidays and maintain our relationship from a distance. It would be an adjustment, but not an abandonment. I accepted the job offer on a Tuesday morning. That evening, after the children were in bed, I sat Dad down at the kitchen table. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might be sick. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something important," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "I've been offered a job in Boston near Aunt Lisa. I'm going to take it." He stared at me blankly for a moment as if I had spoken in a foreign language. Then he laughed. "You can't be serious. What about the kids?" "The kids have you," I replied, "and you'll need to hire someone to help while you're at work. I can give you the names of some agencies." The laughter faded from his face, replaced by something harder. "So you're just going to walk away from your family after everything I've done for you?" "What exactly have you done for me, Dad?" The question escaped before I could stop it, years of resentment behind the words. I've been raising your children since I was 15. I gave up school friends any chance at a normal life to be their caretaker. I've been cooking, cleaning, and parenting while you built your career and dated. What part of that was you doing something for me? His face flushed with anger. I put a roof over your head. I fed you. I kept you safe. That's the bare minimum a parent is supposed to do, I shot back. You were supposed to guide me into adulthood, not use me as free childcare, because you married someone who didn't want to be a mother. You ungrateful little... He stood up so quickly his chair fell backward. After everything this family has been through, your mother would be ashamed of you for abandoning your siblings. The mention of my mother was like a slap. Don't you dare use mum against me, I said, my voice shaking now. She would be horrified that you turned her daughter into an unpaid nanny. She wanted me to go to college to have a career, to live my own life. We were both yelling now, years of unspoken tension erupting like a volcano. I listed sacrifice after sacrifice I had made. The missed school dances, the abandoned college applications, the friendships that withered from neglect. Dad countered with accusations of selfishness and family obligation. In the midst of our argument, I hadn't noticed the twins appearing in the doorway, wide-eyed and frightened. Aiden spoke first. Cassie, are you leaving us? My heart cracked at the fear in his voice. I knelt down to their level, aware that Dad was still fuming behind me. I'm moving to Boston to start a new job, I explained as gently as I could. But I'll still talk to you all the time and visit for holidays and... She's abandoning us, Dad cut in, just like your mother did. The cruelty of his words took my breath away. These children had already lost one mother. To frame my departure in the same way was manipulative and unfair. That's not true, I said firmly, looking at the twins' confused faces. I love you both and Mia too. But I need to start my own life. I'll always be your big sister. A loud wail from upstairs indicated that our shouting had woken Mia. Dad pointed toward the stairs. Well, aren't you going to get her? That's your job, isn't it? For the first time in years, I didn't move. No, Dad. She's your daughter. You get her. The next 2 weeks were excruciating. Dad alternated between angry silence and emotional manipulation, telling the children I didn't love them enough to stay. He called family members to try to pressure me into changing my mind. My grandmother, Dad's mother, lectured me for an hour about family duty and how selfish I was being. Through it all, I held firm. I packed my belongings, which were surprisingly few given how long I had lived in the house. Most of my possessions were practical rather than personal. Clothes that were chosen for durability rather than style. A few books I had managed to read in stolen moments. A box of handmade gifts from the children. The twins reacted differently to the news. Aria became clingy, following me around the house, asking repeatedly if I was really leaving and when I would come back. Aiden retreated into angry silence, refusing to speak to me for days, before finally breaking down and asking if it was his fault I was going. No, sweetie, absolutely not, I assured him, holding his small body as he cried. You and Aria and Mia are the best things in my life, but I need to find out who I am outside of this house. Can you understand that? He nodded against my shoulder. Like in my book, where the bird has to leave the nest. I smiled through my own tears. Exactly like that, and birds always know how to find their way back to visit. Mia was the hardest, too young to understand why I was packing boxes or why everyone was upset. She would bring me her toys, asking me to play, unaware that in a few days I would be gone from her daily life. The thought of her asking for me after I left was almost enough to break my resolve. Almost. The night before my flight, I wrote 3 letters. One for the twins to share, one for Mia when she was older, and one for Dad. In them, I explained my reasons for leaving my love for them and my hopes for our future relationship. It was easier to express these things in writing than through the tension of our current interactions. Dad refused to drive me to the airport. You want independence? Figure out your own transportation, he said coldly. Jamie offered immediately when I called her. I've been waiting years to see you break free, she said as she helped load my suitcases into her car. I'm so proud of you, Cassandra. As we backed out of the driveway, I looked up at the house that had been both home and prison for so many years. The twins stood at the window waving frantically. Dad was nowhere to be seen. I waved back to the children, tears streaming down my face, both heartbroken and lighter than I had felt in years. My first week of freedom was disorienting. Aunt Lisa's apartment in Boston was small but bright with large windows overlooking a park. She had cleared out her spare bedroom for me, buying a new bedspread and lamp to make it feel welcoming. This is your home now, she said as she showed me around. for as long as you need it. The strangest part was the quiet. After years of constant demands of breaking up fights and answering endless questions and responding to cries in the night, the silence felt almost oppressive. I found myself listening for footsteps, for calls of, "Cassie, I need help," for the background noise of cartoons and squabbles. The second strangest part was controlling my own schedule. I could shower without rushing eat when I was hungry, rather than when I had fed everyone else, read a book without interruption. Simple pleasures that had been unavailable to me for so long, they felt decadent now. My new job started the following Monday. It was entry-level customer service at a software company, answering phones and emails about product issues. Not glamorous, but it came with health insurance, a regular paycheck, and most importantly, it was mine. No one could take it away because their childcare fell through or because they wanted to go on a date. The people I worked with were close to my age but seemed years younger in experience. They talked about college parties and backpacking trips through Europe, about dating apps and concerts. I had nothing to contribute to these conversations. While they had been exploring young adulthood, I had been changing diapers and checking homework. But they were kind, inviting me to lunch and happy hour, explaining inside jokes and office politics. Slowly, I began to relax around them, to share carefully edited versions of my background. I helped raise my younger siblings, I would say leaving out the years of effective servitude. Dad's angry texts and calls began the day I left. At first, they were accusatory. How could I abandon my family, how selfish I was, how the children were suffering. When these didn't bring me running back, he switched tactics, sending photos of the twins looking sad or Mia asking where I was. "She cries for you every night," one text read, accompanied by a picture of my little sister's tear-stained face. These messages gutted me. I would stare at my phone, physically ill with guilt and longing. Aunt Lisa helped me establish boundaries. I would only respond to Dad's messages once a day, setting aside specific time, rather than letting his emotional manipulation consume me at all hours. The children's messages were different. The twins had their own tablets and would send me updates about school friends, what they had for dinner. I treasured these glimpses into their lives, responding with enthusiasm and love. We set up weekly video calls where they would give me virtual tours of their rooms, introduce me to new toys, and generally chat as if I were just in another room rather than hundreds of miles away. Dad made these calls difficult whenever he could. He would schedule activities during our planned times or claim technical difficulties with the internet. I learnt to be flexible, to catch the kids whenever possible, even if it meant waking up early on weekends or taking my lunch break in my car for privacy. It was Aria who first mentioned that Dad had started interviewing nannies. She had yellow hair and talked funny, my sister reported during one call. Dad said she might help us after school and make dinner sometimes. Given to eat, Tom, mum's sensation. I felt a complex mix of emotions at this news. Relief that Dad was finally taking responsibility, resentment that it had taken my departure to force the issue, worry about whether the children would be properly cared for, but mostly a guilty sense of validation. If Dad could hire help now, he could have done it years ago rather than placing the burden on me. With Aunt Lisa's encouragement, I began exploring other aspects of life beyond work and family obligation. I joined a book club that met at the local library, my first social activity that wasn't centered around children in over a decade. I started taking walks in the park near our apartment, sometimes stopping to sketch the trees and flowers, rekindling a hobby I had abandoned in high school. One Saturday, about 6 months after I moved, Aunt Lisa took me shopping. "You need clothes that aren't for running after children or standing behind a retail counter," she insisted. I realized all my clothing was practical rather than expressive. Neutral colors, washable fabrics, nothing that would show stains or restrict movement for childcare. In the dressing room, trying on a bright blue dress that served no practical purpose whatsoever, I caught sight of myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. The permanent furrow between my brows had relaxed. My shoulders weren't hunched with tension. I looked younger somehow than I had in years, despite being chronologically older. That evening, I received a text from Dad that made me laugh out loud. "Had to hire a nanny and a housekeeper, costing me a fortune. Hope you're happy." For once, I could answer honestly, I am. The first holiday season away from the children was the hardest part of my new life. I sent presents weeks in advance, books for Aiden, art supplies for Aria, a stuffed elephant for Mia that matched one I kept on my bed. Dad initially threatened not to give them the gifts, but Aunt Lisa intervened, calling him directly to shame him out of such pettiness. We arranged a video call for Christmas morning so I could watch them open my presents. Dad made himself scarce, but I could hear him in the background commenting that the gifts were nothing special. The children disagreed, their faces lighting up at items I had chosen specifically for their interests and personalities. "When are you coming home, Cassie?" Mia asked, hugging the elephant to her chest. At 4, she still didn't fully understand why I had left or why I couldn't just come back. "This is my home now, sweetie," I explained gently. "But I'll come visit soon, I promise." Dad's voice came from off-screen. "Don't make promises you won't keep. That's what your mother said too." It was a cruel comparison, but I refused to let it derail the children's holiday. "I keep my promises," I said firmly, "and I promise I'll always be part of your lives, no matter where I live." After the call ended, I cried in Aunt Lisa's arms, questioning my decision for the 100th time. Did I abandon them? Am I just like Stephanie? "No," Aunt Lisa said firmly. "You gave those children everything for years. You're still giving them love and attention. You just stopped giving them your entire future. There's a world of difference." A week after Christmas, I received a surprising text from Dad. "Twins have school break next week. They want to visit you. I can put them on a plane if you'll pick them up." It was the closest thing to an olive branch he had offered. I immediately agreed, spending the next few days preparing for their visit, buying groceries they liked, arranging days off work, planning activities around Boston that 10-year-olds would enjoy. Dad was coolly civil when he called to confirm details, but I could sense something had shifted. Perhaps the reality of parenting without me had finally sunk in. Perhaps the children had worn him down with their requests to visit. Whatever the reason, I was grateful for the chance to see them. The moment I spotted them coming through the airport gate, my heart nearly burst. Both had grown inches in the months since I'd left. Aria had gotten her ears pierced, sporting tiny star earrings. Aiden's hair was longer, falling into his eyes in a style I knew Stephanie would have hated, but clearly Dad had allowed. They ran to me, crashing into my arms with such force I nearly fell over. We stood in the middle of the busy terminal, hugging and crying and laughing all at once. "You look different," Aiden said, studying my face. "Happier." "I am happier," I admitted, feeling no guilt in the truth. "And I'm even happier now that you're here." During their week-long visit, we played tourists in my new city. We rode the swan boats in the public garden, visited the New England Aquarium, and ate cannoli in the North End. In the evenings, we cooked dinner together in Aunt Lisa's small kitchen, the twins helping chop vegetables and set the table like the capable children they were becoming. It was Aria who broached the subject I had been avoiding. "Dad hired a nanny named Ms. Eleanor," she told me as we walked along the harbour. "She's nice. She makes us do our homework before TV and teaches us Spanish." "That sounds good," I said carefully. "Do you like her?" "She's okay." Aiden shrugged. "Not as good as you, but Dad's home more now. He coaches my soccer team." This was news to me. Dad had always been too busy for such activities when I lived at home. "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely pleased. "How's Mia doing?" "She cried a lot after you left," Aria said matter-of-factly. "But now she's okay. Dad's girlfriend comes over a lot. Mia calls her mummy sometimes." "I guess I sin." I felt a twinge of something. Not quite jealousy, but a complex emotion I couldn't name. "Dad has a girlfriend. Sandra from his office," Aiden confirmed. "She stays over on weekends. She's teaching Mia to bake cookies." So Dad had managed to keep his relationship with Sandra after all, once I wasn't there to provide the childcare that made it possible. Part of me wanted to be bitter about this, but mostly I was relieved. The children needed stable adults in their lives. If Sandra was willing to be that for them, especially for Mia, I could only be grateful. On their last night after Aunt Lisa had gone to bed, the twins and I stayed up late watching movies. During a quiet moment, Aria took my hand. "We were really mad when you left," she admitted. "We thought you didn't love us anymore." "I've never stopped loving you," I said, squeezing her hand. "Not for 1 second. Dad said you were selfish," Aiden added. "But Ms. Eleanor explained about how you raised us when you were just a kid yourself. She said you deserved your own life." "Ms. Eleanor sounds very wise," I said, blinking back tears. "We understand now," Aria continued. "Dad takes care of us because he's our dad. That's his job. You did his job for a long time, but it wasn't really your job. From the mouths of babes, as they say." The twins, at just 10 years old, had come to a realization that Dad had resisted for years. I hugged them both, overwhelmed with pride at their emotional maturity and relief that they didn't hate me for leaving. When I put them on the plane back to Portland, it was with a lighter heart. We had established a new kind of relationship. Not caretaker and dependence, but sister and siblings with love that could stretch across distance. 1 year after I left home, my life had taken shape in ways I couldn't have imagined while trapped in my caretaker role. I had been promoted at work, moving from customer service to a project coordinator position with better pay and more responsibility. My boss had been impressed with my organizational skills and ability to manage complex situations, skills honed through years of running a household. I had moved out of Aunt Lisa's apartment into a small place of my own, a studio with big windows and walls I had painted yellow. It wasn't much, but every item in it was chosen by me, every decision about its arrangement mine alone. I had plants that depended on me in a simple, uncomplicated way. I had a bookshelf full of novels I was slowly working my way through, making up for lost reading time. My relationship with the children had stabilized into regular video calls, text messages, and occasional visits. Dad had gradually stopped trying to sabotage our communication, perhaps realizing it was a battle he couldn't win. He remained cool toward me, but at least he had stopped actively trying to turn the children against me. The biggest surprise came when the twins asked if they could spend part of their summer break with me. Dad said it's okay if you want us, Aiden reported during one of our calls. We can stay for 2 whole weeks. I was thrilled, immediately requesting vacation time from work to coincide with their visit. As the date approached, I deep cleaned my small apartment, bought a blow-up mattress for them to share, and stocked the refrigerator with their favorite foods. The twins who arrived that summer were noticeably different from the children who had visited the previous winter. Both had grown again, Arya now almost as tall as me. They seemed more confident, more self-sufficient, bringing their own books and activities rather than expecting me to entertain them constantly. On their second day, while we were making lunch together, Aiden casually dropped a bombshell. Dad's getting married again. I nearly dropped the plate I was holding. He's what? To Sandra, Arya clarified. In September, we're going to be in the wedding. Me as the flower girl. Wow, I said, struggling to process this information. Are you happy about it? The twins exchanged glances, having one of those silent conversations that only close siblings can have. She's okay, Aiden said finally. She makes Dad happy, and she's nice to us most of the time. She's better with Mia than with us, Arya added. But she takes us shopping sometimes and lets us pick our own clothes. That sounds positive, I said, still digesting the news. Dad hadn't mentioned anything about an engagement during our limited communications. I wondered if he thought I would try to interfere, or if he simply didn't think I deserved to know. Later that night, after the twins were asleep on their air mattress, I received a text from Dad. Assume the twins told you about the wedding. Sandra thought you should know, so it was Sandra's idea to inform me, not his. Interesting. I texted back a simple congratulations and left it at that. The twins' visit flew by, filled with more sightseeing, a day trip to the beach, and quiet evenings playing board games or watching movies. They told me more about their lives, how Dad had indeed become more involved since I left coaching Aiden's soccer team and attending Arya's school concerts, how Miss Eleanor the nanny only came after school now rather than living in, how Mia was talking more, developing a personality that was distinctly her own. She says she remembers you, Arya told me as we walked through Boston Common, but I don't think she really does. She was too little when you left. That's okay, I said, though it pinched my heart a little. Maybe she can come visit sometime too, when she's older. On their last night, the twins surprised me with a gift, a framed photo of the 3 of them that Sandra had helped them pick out. So you don't forget what we look like, Aiden explained. As if I ever could, I replied, hugging them both. After they left, returning to a life that increasingly didn't include me, I sat in my quiet apartment, reflecting on how much had changed in a year. The children were growing up with their father finally acting like a parent. I was building a career and finding my own interests. We were all in our different ways thriving. I thought about the day I had finally stood up to Dad, the fear and guilt that had nearly paralyzed me, the certainty that leaving would damage the children irreparably. How wrong I had been. My departure had forced Dad to step up to become the parent he should have been all along. In a strange way, leaving had been the best thing I could have done for them. 2 months after the twins' visit, I received a formal invitation to Dad and Sandra's wedding. I was surprised, having assumed I would be deliberately excluded. A handwritten note was enclosed with Sandra's name signed at the bottom. We would really like you to be there. The children miss you. After careful consideration, I decided to attend. Not for Dad, whose relationship with me remained strained, but for the children who were still the center of my heart, despite the distance between us. The ceremony was small, held in the backyard of our family home. I arrived just before it began slipping into a seat at the back. The twins spotted me immediately, waving excitedly from their places near the makeshift altar. Mia, now a precocious 4-year-old, looked adorable in her flower girl dress, though she scattered her petals in clumps rather than the traditional sprinkle. Dad looked happy, genuinely happy, as Sandra walked toward him. He had lost weight, trimmed his hair, and stood straighter than I remembered. Sandra looked nervous, but determined. I realized I knew very little about her beyond what the children had told me. After the ceremony, during the casual reception, Mia approached me with curious eyes. "Are you Cassie?" From the pictures, I knelt down to her level. "I am. I'm your big sister." She studied me seriously, then nodded as if confirming something to herself. "Daddy said you had to go away to be happy." Something like that. I agreed, surprised that Dad had explained it in those terms. "Are you happy now?" she asked with a child's directness. I smiled, realizing the truth of my answer. "Yes, I am. Are you happy?" She nodded vigorously. "I have a new mommy now," she said, pointing to Sandra, who was chatting with guests, "and a big sister who visits sometimes." It struck me then that Mia's experience was entirely different from the twins. She had been too young when I left to remember me as her primary caretaker. To her, I was just the sister who lived far away and sent presents on birthdays. There was no trauma in our relationship, no abandonment issues to work through. Perhaps that was a blessing. Dad approached as Mia ran off to join the other children playing in the yard. It was the first time we had spoken face to face since my departure. "You came," he said, sounding genuinely surprised despite having sent the invitation. "For the kids," I clarified, "and to wish you and Sandra well." He nodded, looking uncomfortable. We stood in awkward silence for a moment before he spoke again. "The house is different without you." "I imagine it is," I replied, unsure where he was going with this. "I didn't realize how much you did until you were gone." He continued, looking somewhere over my shoulder rather than at me. "How much I put on you. It wasn't fair. It was the closest thing to an apology I was likely to get. I could have pushed for more, could have demanded a full accounting of the years he had taken from me. But looking at him now, I realized I didn't need that anymore. His acknowledgement was enough. No, it wasn't fair, I agreed. But I'm building a good life now, and it seems like the kids are doing well. "They are," he said, finally meeting my eyes. "Sandra's been good for them, for all of us. And having to step up to be a real father without you handling everything, it's made me better too." I nodded, surprised by his self-awareness. "I'm glad." Before the conversation could continue, the twins appeared eager to introduce me to their friends and show me the changes they'd made to their rooms. Dad stepped back, allowing them to pull me away. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was a truce. That night in the hotel room I'd booked, rather than staying in my old home, I reflected on the strange journey that had led me here. I thought about the scared 14-year-old who had watched her father remarry, the exhausted 22-year-old who had juggled other people's children and her own fading dreams, the determined 26-year-old who had finally chosen herself. I took out my phone and texted Aunt Lisa. "Wedding was okay, Dad almost apologized. Kids are happy, I'm happy too." Her reply came immediately. "You deserved happiness all along, Cassandra. It just took you leaving for everyone to see it. I'm so proud of you." As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about how leaving had been the hardest and best decision I had ever made. How sometimes walking away isn't abandonment, but the bravest form of love. For yourself and unexpectedly for those you leave behind. How the one who left had indeed ended up being the happiest, but in doing so had created space for everyone else to find their happiness too. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice for your own well-being that others didn't understand? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Remember, sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most healing outcomes for everyone involved. Thank you for listening to my story today. If it resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to choose themselves. Until next time, this is Cassandra, finally living my own life.